Well, welcome and happy whatever time of day it is to you from ICEA. This is Megan Jones. I'm ICEA's Executive Director, and happy here to welcome you to our Tech Showcase webinar today, brought to you by PerfectXL. We're going to hear from Joel Steendam, who's going to tell us more about effectively standardizing model audits for cost estimation spreadsheets. During the webinar, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. If we have time at the end, we'll be able to get to them, and if not, we'll pass them on to Joel to answer for you offline. With that, I'm going to pass it off to Joel. Thanks so much.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Megan, for passing it over. That sounds a little bit like an airline announcement, keep your arms and legs inside the vehicle. But no, yeah, I'm really looking forward to being able to talk to all of you about, what we do here at PerfectXL, which is essentially to try to help and enable Excel users to standardize and speed up, especially that audit process when it comes to spreadsheets, because it can be such a costly process and time sink. I didn't want to just go ahead and assume that this would be for everybody or that it would match kind of every use case. So specifically from a cost estimation perspective, I asked someone that we've been in contact with, Bob Keener, to just share a couple of words at the beginning to hopefully sketch a little bit the relevancy of PerfectXL for this group specifically as well. And because he's been a member of this group for a long time, I thought it would be a good idea to ask him to just briefly share kind of, how he sees PerfectXL, or maybe some of the overlap between what a cost estimator does on a daily basis and what our software can do. So maybe Bob, if you would be willing to just hop on real quick and share a couple of words.
Okay, yeah, don't use Zoom often enough. All right, well, thank you, everybody. I'll make this quick. I've been doing this for 20 some years and started using PerfectXL. And I just want to share with you my experience. So for me, I'm as a cost estimator, I'm always in a time constrained environment. There's lots to do, especially towards the end of the life cycle when you should be checking your model and making sure there's no errors and stuff. So I've used PerfectXL to support these time constrained reviews. And especially I've also been asked to help error check models that were done by others. So I don't know what's behind all the doors or behind all the links. So that can be a really challenging situation if it's the first time you've ever seen a model. First of all, I found the interface easy to use and understand, so I didn't have to spend a lot of time, going into the manual to figure out what I was going to do. And second of all, I was impressed because it enabled me to do these reviews quickly, and I was able to provide documentation from the tool to help others and to show them where the errors were found. And it was quick, and honestly, it was pretty easy. So it helped me quite a bit when I was dealing with others because I could provide that documentation. So that's all I got, Joel. It was a good product, I think, anyway, for myself personally.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for sharing, Bob. And also thank you for introducing me to this group because, I'm looking forward to chatting with you all and potentially also in May, I think, at the live event. If possible, I'd love to meet some of you in person. I think it's best just to get started, to kick it off. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, hop into a presentation. Just got a couple of slides to really quickly introduce kind of us and what we do. Let me see if I can find the share screen functionality here. Go ahead and share. I'm guessing that you can all see that okay. Our company is PerfectXL, and our slogan is "It's your choice to make Excel perfect." I think that's kind of the background I come from as well. I'm a massive Excel nerd, but especially focused on eliminating risks and mitigating errors when it comes to Excel modeling. A little bit of the history of Excel. Some of you may know, or some of you may have seen, the first kind of sort of spreadsheet representation that we found was actually in 1800 BC, where on certain clay tablets in Babylon, they had kind of block-like or table-like looking scratchings on some of those clay tablets. And it actually happened that there was some summation errors at that time already as well. So people have been making mistakes with any form of technology for as long as we can remember. And of course, we've had VisiCalc and Lotus 123, which some of you may have worked with before. Now, worldwide, I think it's fair to say that Excel is by far the most used financial planning estimating tool known to man. And we as PerfectXL think we're a perfect addition to that process in terms of mitigating the risks involved when utilizing these models, but also in speeding up and effectively standardizing some of those processes. A little bit of the history behind us. We're really based in academic research around, 14 years ago now. We started as a technical project from the University of Delft. Infotron BV as a company started in 2012, also more than 10 years ago now. And the tools that you'll see later in this demonstration as well have been around for about a year, a little over a year now. So our kind of go-to-market and big moment has been much more recent than all of the research and kind of background and study that we've done in that process. Now I'm going to ask just really quick, for those of you here, I'm guessing that, most of you work in the cost estimation space. You've been in these kinds of situations. But just imagine for a second that you've got a big project in front of you. You've gotten some sort of, big, high-profile cost estimation project where, you're expected to develop and build a model in a situation where there have been errors found in the past. And of course, as always, time constraints are massive. I think many of you will have found yourself in this situation, and many of you feel kind of that time constraint in the process as well. And that's where I think in these kinds of scenarios where errors need to be eliminated, where model quality stands at the forefront, that I think our tools as PerfectXL can really help in the process of standardizing and automating some of those error checks and ensuring the fact that the output, the end product that you end up pushing to the client is of the highest order. A couple of things that I think can be really important, especially for cost estimators when it comes to developing models, is the accuracy, of course, ultimately of a model. When it comes to your input data or situational things, what inflation might look like in 10 years, it's impossible to be completely accurate. But when it comes to the workings of the Excel model itself, kind of the material values, your sums, your formulas, the way you're linking between different tabs or what kinds of external sources you're using, it is possible to be accurate. And I think that's an expectation as well, that your models are calculating correctly given the variables and inputs in place. So I think that accuracy is definitely at the forefront of this process. Another element is auditability. I think we all know when developing Excel models that documentation is something that's often sort of looked at secondarily, where you're trying to get kind of this end total, this sum, a summary or a graph overview. What's often forgotten is the fact that Excel models also need to be understandable for others, that an auditing party, such as a government-ordained institution or simply a partner or a client that wants to look at the value or the effectiveness of a spreadsheet, there needs to be information available to anyone else looking in to be able to understand that a spreadsheet has been developed correctly using the correct data as a source, and that the outcomes that come out of one of these cost estimation models are accurate. And finally, I think efficiency in many areas of the world and in business especially, efficiency is important, but I think especially in these kinds of high octane, quick turnaround projects, it's important not only that the model itself is efficient, that the performance is good, but also that the process of developing and structuring these models is just rapid, that you're able to move through the process as quickly and efficiently as possible. And I think we really believe here at PerfectXL that our tools enable users to do that. Our suite consists of 4 elements currently. That's the PerfectXL Risk Finder, which looks specifically kind of at that audit process. How do you automatically eliminate some of those pitfalls and risks associated with just the nature of Excel, the human error that could be involved? We've got PerfectXL Explore, which is kind of on that documentation, the auditability side, understanding complex spreadsheets. Compare, a version management tool. As the name says, what it's used for is to compare 2 different versions of the same file to understand what's the latest version, what changes have taken place in a model. And then the highlighter, which really looks kind of from a granular level at an Excel file, looking at things like consistency, if the data is well structured, and if there aren't things that might be forgotten. I'm going to hop out of the presentation and actually just dive straight into the software. Again, please, if there are any questions in between, throw them in the chat. I don't know if I will see them right away, but I'm sure that Megan will let me know if anything pops up. I'm going to close out of the presentation for now. We will come back to this. And I'm just going to dive into an Excel model because I think that's the space that most of you spend a lot of time in. I'm going to open up a file. You'll see there's all kinds of things going on. I don't think it's of crucial importance to understand the entire model right now, but it's kind of a mid-sized Excel model that's used to calculate kind of the profit and loss and the profitability of a hotel in this case. What we see up here is the PerfectXL add-in. This is the newest of the new. And it's an add-in in Excel that we utilize to be able to access those standalone tools that I just showed you, those 4 separate tools, which allow you to very quickly be able to audit and also just get some standardization in the process of auditing Excel models. If we just start kind of from the left and start heading towards the right, you'll see that the first button up here says risk analysis. If I click on that, what happens is my spreadsheet is sent over to the Risk Finder tool. For the more technical people among you, this tool is completely offline. The data is not being sent anywhere. So any kind of confidential or private information that might be in the spreadsheet, it is contained within your local device. You don't have to worry about anything like that. But once I enter the Risk Finder, I'm met with this kind of risk matrix, which handles 3 different severities of issues that can be found in Excel models. And these, like, we've got risks, which are probably real issues in the model. Something is not calculating correctly. We've got an Excel error. Something's broken. We've got a circular reference. We've got an error that's not opening, model that's not opening properly. Generally, these risks are something that definitely need to be looked at. But we also have things like weaknesses, which generally refer to best practices that are not being followed in the model development process. You've got things like volatile formulas, for example, which every time your model changes or any of the data changes, this model will kind of rerun again and again, issues of that nature. And then we've got things like observations as well. When it comes to spreadsheets, there's a lot of things that aren't necessarily good or bad, but you might see things like a hidden worksheet or some hidden information somewhere, which can be good in some cases, but it's also good for a model auditor to be aware that that kind of stuff is there. Let's hop into a super clear example. If I see on the left here, this overlaps with these kind of categories that we see in this matrix. The first example is just Excel errors, really straightforward. I see a little introductory text. What is an Excel error? Why might it arise for various different reasons? And I see a couple of different references as to where Excel errors have been found in my model. If I click on the first case, I'll also see a screenshot of that actual location in my Excel model, which is huge. In terms of being able to understand what's going wrong directly within the tool. I see a screenshot. In this case, there's a divided by 0 error in my spreadsheet, and I can see the formula that's causing it. Well, in this case, the divided by 0 is hard-coded into the formula itself. Somebody's made a pretty dumb mistake. But if I click on this screenshot, I'm actually able to open my Excel file to that specific location. As you'll see, it overlaps exactly with what's going on here. And the adjustment in this case is super easy to make. I can go ahead and grab this divided by 0, delete that, because I'm sure there's no specific reason that would need to be there. I hit enter and it's resolved. One of the ways that we, I think, make a big difference here is that we aggregate issues as much as possible to group them together, so you're not met with hundreds of thousands of problems. And in this case, for example, we had an error here, but also references to that same error. So I can see here that there was a bunch of references to that same divided by 0 error in this case. And by being able to fix the root error, these errors have also dissipated. So just a really quick way to be able to analyze things like that. In this case, I think everybody knows with Excel errors in this case that it's going to be an issue. It's wrong in the spreadsheet. There are some things that are a little trickier. I think hard-coded numbers in formulas might not necessarily be one of those, but yeah, I think anyone that's been modeling for a long time will know how frustrating it is when you come across a formula that has some kind of assumption built in, a hard-coded number, in this case, plus 23. I'm pretty sure no one within any company 2 or 3 years after developing a model could tell you what these hard-coded numbers are supposed to represent. And that's one of the big issues, is that we don't have additional context. We're not storing it in a cell or in a defined name. So we have no idea where this information comes from. And from an auditability perspective, that is super detrimental to the value of formulas. all the information that I'm telling you now as well is available within the tool. So there's this library. In the library, it tells you all about in what kinds of situations a hard-coded number can be negative or detrimental, which kinds of formulas we exclude, in which cases it's okay. And it also refers to kind of general thought leadership on the topic. Some of you may have heard of the FAST standards or the ICAEW principles, which really look at how modeling can be done well in Excel. Just to grab a couple of other issues and risks of where it can go wrong, trying not to give you all too much trauma, and hopefully these don't relate too much to real life events that you've run into, but things like longer cell reference expected happen really, really quickly in Excel models. I have here, again, a screenshot of my Excel sheet. I can see that there's a sum formula calculating B22 to B24. The formula refers to this cell range, while data populates all of B22 to B25. Again, I mean, it's interesting that it says it in text form, but if I click on the screenshot, I'll be able to jump to that specific location in my spreadsheet. If I click on the formula, I'll also directly see that rooms, events, and bar in this case are being calculated, but restaurant is excluded for some reason. This is one of those dumb mistakes that I think most Excel modelers think they could never make themselves, but it happens so quickly. Like in this case, it looks really simple, but it could be a reference to a different worksheet, to a different workbook even. It happens with row inserts, with structure changes, with changes to the data, or maybe with years, for example, if you're calculating 2022, 2023, but you haven't included 2024 yet, it's so easy to miss that. So I think an automated check like this that just helps end users be able to see where something might be going wrong really massively increases the value of those spreadsheets and the confidence in the modeling process. Let's head back over to the risk finder, because there's a bunch of other cases here that we could look at. Something like a double count, for example. This is another one that's really easy to miss. I see here that the sum of C8 to C13 is added onto the sum of C4 to C6, while it looks like the C4 to C5 cells are counted multiple times due to an intermediate result in C6. Again, if I click on the spreadsheet, I jump into this formula, you'll see I've calculated two little groups of stuff, but this gross profit line in C6 appears to be a subtotal already, which means that those two cells above it, the sales and the cost of sales, are being counted twice in my total overhead sum. These are just kind of those simple things, which, again, as an experienced modeler, if you're looking at it and you're diving specifically into this formula, you're probably able to spot on your own. But being able to do that automatically, having it all in one place, having advice within the tool as well on how to fix the situation. It's suggesting in this case you could replace it by a subtotal function, or adjusting the formula itself not to include that subtotal cell. Having all of that information in one place and being able to just quickly scan through this and decide also for yourself, hey, is this a risk that's acceptable? I would say in this case, probably not. Is it up for discussion? Is it unacceptable? Or is it even irrelevant? And these status that you can give to the tools, or notes that you can leave behind. For example, let's just say Bob developed the model, which I'm sure he wouldn't do. But I could ask Bob, hey, Bob, please fix this. And this will come out of the reports at the end of the process of utilizing the tool as well. So you can go ahead and also add statuses to different risks. Again, from a process optimization perspective, being able to in one place evaluate all of the potential risks or issues within a spreadsheet is incredibly valuable. Again, on the left side, you can see there are tons of different kinds of risks or issues that can take place in spreadsheets. Just to grab a couple of examples of maybe weaknesses, so you understand sort of from a best practice perspective what we look at. We look at things like long formulas. Again, relatively straightforward. A long formula is difficult to read. In this case, it's got 226 characters. For an auditor or someone coming in as a third party, or maybe if you're trying to work with a colleague, it's really difficult to understand what a formula of this length is actually doing. So being able to go in here and simplify it, splitting up those different functions, helps in the readability, the trustworthiness of the file, and in a general sense with improving that model quality structurally across a company or across a group of users. Some fun ones we've seen before, or unfortunately run into with a couple of different clients, are things like invisible cell values. Sometimes people will intentionally try to hide certain values by making the foreground color of certain values the same color as the background color, which makes them unreadable in the spreadsheet. This is one of those things that's really, again, hard to spot if you don't have some kind of tool helping you. In this case, I can clearly see, hey, it looks like there's a bunch of little cell references here that have the same foreground color as background color, therefore creating invisible values. Again, super easy fix. If I give them a color, I'll be able to see those values again. But as someone that's auditing or double checking a spreadsheet, it's really, really valuable to be able to dive in and see those kinds of things. Yeah, again, as I'm going through this demonstration, I'd love to be answering questions specifically on the topic. I don't know if there's been anything in the chat yet. Megan, have you seen any questions come through yet?
So far, they are impressed into silence.
Impressed into silence. Okay, well, that's great. If there are any questions or there are any comments or anything like that, or a challenge maybe, feel free to throw that in there because I'd love to jump in on that. But as we haven't heard anything yet, I will move along. I think good to quickly point out as well is from this add-in, yeah, you can start that risk analysis, start looking at it from the tool holistically, or you can filter directly on a specific issue. So if you're nervous that your spreadsheet might contain some hard-coded numbers, or it might have a circular reference or some hidden information that you're running into, you can directly jump to that specifically. So taking those hard-coded numbers, for example, just going to go ahead and not save the comments there. I'll be able to jump directly to that category. It'll be filtered on hard-coded numbers, and I'll see a couple of different cases of what could potentially be going wrong. Yeah, for the risk finder, at the end of the process, again, once you've gone through this, once you've checked the different kinds of risks or issues, it might seem like a lot, I think, maybe from a demo like this as well, as it's an unfamiliar spreadsheet. What we've heard from clients is that even when there's 100 or 200 findings, that it is really quick to go through it, as you're able to just kind of click through side to side, be able to stop, or recording's back. Okay. Sorry for the interruption. As you're filtering through these risks, it's quite quick to be able to get a feel for kind of the general quality of a spreadsheet and also be able to pick out the things that might be most relevant. And at the end of this process, you're able to create an export in Excel. Go ahead and run that just to show you what that looks like. Yeah, you're able to run an export in Excel. In this case, I haven't applied any statuses, but you can see that those different categories of inspections, different categories, the different risks, weaknesses, and observations. And in this details overview, I get that same information as was in the Risk Finder UI, but then in an Excel table, which makes it really easy to kind of filter this information, add in comments or statuses, and then I can send this export to someone else with the Risk Finder who can re-import this into their tool and continue with the audit that someone else is doing as well. But this is just a good way to kind of document, hey, in this version of the file, this is going wrong. How can I use that information to create a better version in the future, or iterate on this version to reduce the amount of risks or issues as much as possible? That's the Excel report. You can also create a fancy PDF report if that's something that you would want to do. Let's take a report per worksheet, for example. I think, again, from an auditability perspective, being able to quickly run a report or be able to show a report that says, hey, I've done my due diligence. I've taken the time to have a look at the risks. This is the reason why certain things are the way they are in the spreadsheet. And this is kind of my defense system also as well, to say, hey, at least from a material perspective, the spreadsheet is operating as expected, and any potential risks have been dealt with in some way. Here you get a spreadsheet quality matrix per worksheet, see the different cases where something might be going wrong. And then per sheet, again, in the title, I see there's some sensitive data. I've got some phone numbers. I've got some unnecessary spaces. This is just in data. If you add a space to something, in data, if you add a space to something, it's hard for lookup formulas to be able to detect those values. Yeah, a bunch of different risks. Again, worksheet by worksheet, all of the same risks that are in the risk finder will come up here. And it's just a good way to be able to document those and share them with others.
Joel, we got 2 questions in. I just
Great.
sort of paused, so I thought this might be a good time. Oh my goodness, 3. So first up, we got, can this be used on any version of Excel?
Yes, absolutely. Some of the advice we give is related to certain versions of Excel. So for example, with the new 365 versions of Excel, you've got access to some dynamic array formulas, things like XLOOKUPs and filters and things like that. There are cases in which our advice would be to use one of those formulas, which of course, if you have an older version of Excel, that won't work necessarily, but it is backwards compatible in the sense that even older versions of Excel models will run in here, no problem.
Then I guess a follow-up question comes to, how about problems of conversion from an earlier version of Excel? Can it be used in the conversion Excel file?
Yeah, regardless, you can run a comparison report. So we'll get over to that tool as well, which will show you the differences between two versions of a file. But this will definitely spot some of the general issues that happen when converting a file over to a more recent version of Excel. In many cases, that kind of looks like Excel errors or things like that cropping up. So a lot of the issues that will take place as part of a conversion would be spotted by the risk finder. But the first place I would look is that compare tool. So once we get over to that, I'll highlight that functionality as well.
Okay, then does it have the ability to check you've selected the correct forms in a, I'm sorry, does it have the ability to check you've selected the correct cells in a formula? For example, a profit formula where you multiply cost by hours.
Ooh, that's a good question. The tool is not smart enough necessarily to know where you've placed cost and hours, but it would see, for example, if you've got data that refers to part of a data range. So if you've got your cost and your hours stacked, for example, and you've only included the cost and the hours are right under it, then the formula might expect that you would have included the hours in that case. And it also does spot things like empty cell references. So if you've accidentally referred to a cell that doesn't contain any data, I don't know if I've got a good example of that here. No, unfortunately, don't have a good example in this sheet specifically, but if a formula refers to an empty cell or a group of empty cells, then it would trigger that. And that's often kind of what happens when you miss the data that you're trying to utilize.
Okay, we have two questions about compatibility with and integration with other softwares. Do you want to hold those until another point?
Yeah, I guess in a general sense, because our tools are located outside of Excel, it's able to check tools. It's able to check Excel models holistically. So in a general sense, we've never had issues with integrating the software alongside other things. I think it is a good question because a lot of plugins and add-ins do have that issue. In our case, it's not an issue because we do all of the analysis outside of kind of the Excel housing. But I mean, we can come back to that in kind of the Q&A section as well and dive a little bit deeper into it at the end. But I did see one more question coming in, or at least I see the chat number going up.
Yeah, I think this one you can blow right through. Will it work with Google Sheets?
Unfortunately, it won't work with Google Sheets in the Google environment, but if you download it as an Excel, you can check Google Sheets because the formulas have very similar syntaxes and stuff. So you can download a Google Sheet if you've got Excel on your computer and then run it through the risk finder, and that will work. But perfect. It's great to get some questions and some interaction. I think it's a good moment as well, though, to move on to the next tool, because I think how we think about spreadsheets is very interesting. A lot of, I already had file analyze. I'm going to go ahead and click and drag in the sheet right away so you've got something visual while I talk over it. The way I think a lot of people think about spreadsheets is just in terms of cells kind of on their own in a way. They're looking at a specific worksheet or a specific sum, and sometimes we forget to zoom out and look at the Excel spreadsheet as a model as a whole. And I think in Excel, in many cases, everything's kind of working together. Where your inputs come from are important, where your calculations take place, where your outputs are, and making sure that you've got clear divides between where each individual thing is happening is super crucial to developing good Excel models. As you can see, I'll throw it in again. This tool is super quick, and it's a super quick way to create some form of documentation already as well, because this is a visual representation of how a spreadsheet is built up. So I can see up here in orange any external sources. So it might be a link to a spreadsheet, to a database, to maybe some kind of web service, any queries that are there. And these arrows represent connections between different sheets. So in this case, I can see that in calculation 1, there's a reference back to currency rates, and that's what's creating that connection, and that's what's initiating kind of that data flow throughout the model. super powerful, I think, that we're able to generate this so quickly. And while it may look a little overwhelming right now, this is a super useful tool to understanding unfamiliar spreadsheets. So one of the use cases Bob was also talking about is when you're looking at or auditing a cost estimation done by somebody else, how do we, as quickly as possible, kind of identify the bottlenecks of a model? How do we understand the underlying structure? How do we understand where our end totals or results might be? This tool not only helps you be able to identify where those kinds of things would be. In this case, at the bottom, I see all of these arrows ultimately end up in this summary sheet. For me, that makes it pretty clear that even if it wasn't called summary, this is probably where I would be finding my end totals, my total estimate, my graphs, my results, whatever it might be. And I can use these little arrows in the sheets as well to jump directly to the Excel file, to that specific spot. Per worksheet, I'm getting tons of information as well on things like, well, let's take an example like this. I can see there's 700 filled cells, 4 conditional format rules, 9 data validations, 6 defined names, and 23 unique formulas. If I really want to drill down and see those individual formulas, I can do that. I just click on that formulas. And if I want to jump to a specific formula, again, I'm able to do that. So it's really, what it's essentially doing is pulling the entire spreadsheet out, pulling it apart, and then putting it back together in kind of a visual format so we can understand it from a holistic perspective. A bunch of other stuff that you can find here as well, things like defined names. I'm not sure how many of you really work with defined names. It's a cool way to give things like, VAT in this case, or certain core values that are reused in the model and name so that you can refer to that name in formulas. But often it's accidentally copied over from previous versions of a file, or it can become just kind of unused stuff floating around in a spreadsheet. And with these references, I can see how often a certain defined name is actually being utilized, or how often a reference is being built to them. So I can also use that information to go ahead and clean up any unnecessary or unused defined names in this case. From this external sources perspective, also, I can see any external dependencies of the file. So which other files do I need to have available to make sure that I've got real data coming into my sheets? Is it linking to maybe an estimation I've done in the past, or a certain data source, an input sheet, whatever it might be? You're able to read out exactly where those external sources can be found, and where possible, you're also able to open. I'm hoping that, well, I don't think I have access to that drive location, but you would be able to also open any sheets that's available to you at that time. Again, I think the visualization is a really powerful tool also from a documentation perspective, to be able to share with, for example, an auditing body or a colleague that needs to understand your file. And there's a couple of different modes you can also take in terms of what you visually see in front of you. For example, I can change to input and output mode, which means that I see sheet colors based on whether they are core output sheets, core input sheets, or both. I can see cell count. So where are most of my filled cells taking place? Where is the core kind of concentration of information in the sheet? And then I can also take over the tab colors from Excel itself. So let's say if I wanted to make my summary pink for some reason, this is kind of pink. Go ahead. If I save this, refresh, again, super quick. We can usually analyze faster than Excel can actually open the files. I'll see that my summary sheet has become pink in this case. And this is really useful, I think, from a documentation perspective, to be able to represent the model in a really accurate and holistic way as well. Are there any questions on this? I did see the chat number go up again in between.
It was just a compliment on the visualization, so well done.
Oh, great. Good to hear. Yeah, from here, this visualization is a bit adjustable as well. These little green checkboxes allow me to turn things off. For example, let's say the external sources are great, but I don't need to see them in this case. I can turn those off. I can turn off defined names. VBA modules, if present, will also be shown in that way. I could turn off these title and guidance because they're not really impacting the flow of the model. And then if I'm happy with my end result, I can go ahead and save that as well. So I could save it as a PNG. As an example, go ahead and save that. And you'll see it's got a transparent background, and my computer is showing the picture on a black background. But this is a fully transparent or transparent background visualization that I can easily put into a Word document, into the documentation sheet on my Excel model itself. or send in an email to a client, whatever it might be. Just a really clean and clear way to visualize what's going on in an Excel spreadsheet. We've got 2 more tools, and then I think opening it up a bit more for Q&A as well, to be able to have a bit of a discussion with anyone that would like. The 2 tools that I wanted to still show are the highlighter. This is kind of, in some ways, I guess, a simplified combination between the risk finder and the explore tool. So in the intersection between trying to locate issues within the model and trying to better understand how a model works, we find the highlighter. The highlighter tool's really simple. What it does is it's going to give a color to different cells based on certain inputs. So for example, here I'm giving a blue color to all formula cells. Pretty straightforward, maybe not super exciting yet. If I check this box over here, I'm also highlighting the single references, and suddenly something becomes a little bit interesting here, is that one cell has not been highlighted while all the surrounding cells have. So I can see that there's some kind of dynamic reference to overhead sum, which is broken up by one hard-coded value, 25,000, in the middle of that range. For those that were paying attention, this issue will also be caught with the risk finder. There was a formula interrupted by data finding within the risk finder. I didn't jump into it specifically, but these things will also be located by the risk finder. But being able to visually see it in front of you, I think, adds a lot of value. While this is fun, I think something like consistent formulas is the mode that I probably use most. What this does is it gives a unique color to each unique formula on my sheet. And it's a great test for myself as well to make sure that I'm being consistent and consequent when I'm building up spreadsheets, because ranges with a mix of formulas are always really muddy, difficult to audit, difficult to understand, but also more challenging to transfer as I'm building new tabs or new sheets or new functionality. Being able to just understand a really clean core structure of formulas really helps in the process of making sure that I've got a reliable spreadsheet. I can see here, for example, that I've got one formula that runs all the way across to here. Looks like it's a really simple, one value minus another one. But as I run across the row, I see that the color changes here, and suddenly there's 3 values involved. For some reason, somebody's gone ahead and added this I21 in this case, and then clicked and dragged that formula across here, which, again, from an Excel perspective, looks like 2 consistent formulas next to each other. But our highlighter is able to spot that, hey, there's one row with a formula that's running halfway through, and then that formula discontinues as that row continues. So these kinds of checks are really, really valuable to making sure that we're being consequent and not missing any core issues. A bunch of other modes here. Again, we try to be as complete as possible when running through this software. We can show things like input and output cells. This shows if a cell is being used somewhere else in the model as well. Let's say, for some reason, I'm using a quick sum of this row because I just quickly want to tell my boss that, the total overhead sums is this. You'll see instantly that it pops up in blue as a formula output, which means it's safe in the future if I'm cleaning up the file to go ahead and remove this because it's not being referenced anywhere else in my workbook. Again, just a few cool tricks that you can kind of do with this highlighter, things like cell values as well. In some cases, we might have some, in this case, I'm highlighting number cells, text cells, date time cells, and you're also able to just generate a full list of all the cells that have been highlighted. In this case, also, if somewhere at the bottom of your sheet, for example, let's reintroduce one of those divided by 0 issues. If something like this is taking place, it'll also highlight any error cells. If I scroll down here, I can see that there's some error cells at the bottom of my sheet that weren't visual right away, but I can jump straight over to those to resolve those issues as well. Any thoughts, questions on the highlighter? Feel free to throw them in the chat. I haven't seen the number go up, so I'm guessing that there hasn't been any in the in-between, but hopefully you see the value of kind of combining that idea of getting some more insight into a spreadsheet, as well as the risk finding portion of making sure that we're being consequent as we build up these spreadsheets, and the value there. Jumping in to the last tool, the compare tool. Some of you were talking about different versions of Excel and kind of the compatibility across those versions, if we're using newer functionality or older functionality in Excel models. I think it's super valuable then to just immediately be able to see what's changed across 2 different versions of a file. What we're met with when we drag in 2 files is a summary first of what's changed. In some cases, the summary can already answer any question that we might have. In case we send like a template, for example, to a client and we're asking them just to fill in data, then the fact that formulas or structure might have changed is an instant red flag where we're saying, hey, what's happened here? I expected you to fill in some ones and zeros and suddenly my formula's changed. Then it's instantly kind of a point where we can dive in and see what's actually going on there. For example, if I want to see just the formulas that have been edited, I go ahead and click on that 3 in the intersectionality between formulas and edits. And I'll see that indeed here a cell reference has changed. This sum B22 to B24 has become B22 to B25. Just really clear inline. I can see exactly what's going on. I can also put it side by side that I see the formula in version 1 compared to the formula in version 2. If I'm looking more holistically at what has shifted or what has changed between 2 different versions of a file, I can also view it from a worksheet's perspective. This just shows me per worksheet what's actually changing. So in this case, the title sheet and the guidance sheet have been removed from the file. I can see that this reservation sheet has been made hidden. Calculation 1 has an insertion on it. And again, if I wanted to see exactly what's inserted, I can click over to it. I'll see that a value here has been inserted and it looks like my email address. Great, someone's decided to add my email address into the file. I'm guessing that was me at some point. But in that way, you're just able to quickly scan what's actually changed, but also which worksheets remain unchanged, because that also reduces work. That if you're trying to see what's different between 2 versions of a file, it's nice to know that something like profit and loss, for example, hasn't changed at all. So it's safe to assume that there's nothing different through a version change or through a compatibility change that might have broken on this worksheet specifically. Also VBA, I don't know how many of you write macros. I think it's quite scary for a lot of Excel users, but in case there's been any changes to a macro, in this case, a very simple rename worksheet module was added into the file. If there have been any changes with that, those will show up here as well. I'm going to go ahead and show all differences again. Here you see an overview of everything that's changed. And as with all of our other tools, we have reporting functionality. So if you go ahead and export here at the top, what will happen is we get a relatively simple, hoping that it pops up quickly, a relatively simple Excel file where we see here in the summary overview that this version has been compared with this version. The last modified date is included, the author, the number of worksheets in each file, the total number of differences. So that's those kind of aggregated clumps like one worksheet or one row insert, and the total details. Then a little summary of what's going on. And if you really want to see just a log of everything, it's here. You see all the values in version 1 of the file compared to the values in version 2. And if I just scroll through here real quick, these are red because these values used to exist. They no longer exist. They've been deleted or removed. If I scroll down a little ways, you'll see any insertions with just a value in version 2. Version 1 was empty. And then edits, I'm guessing they're somewhere in the middle. Here we go. Edits will show you a value in version 1 compared to a value in version 2 on the right. And this really works as kind of a change log as well. If you're developing a model, that if you're being consequent in saving version after version, you kind of save the hassle of that needle in the haystack moment where you think, oops, this is broken, something's gone wrong, but I'm not sure where it broke. Having those different versions in place and being able to run those comparisons quickly allows users to be able to locate which version of something it went wrong in and how to remedy those situations as well. So I think this tool can be incredibly powerful and useful. There are some other comparison tools on the market, and the big difference between what we do and what they do is the fact that we're able to track structure changes. So I think we'll see here as well. Yeah, there's a couple of structure changes with stuff made hidden or stuff being moved around. In most other comparison tools, if you rename a worksheet, it'll look like the entire worksheet with all the cells on it was removed in one version and reinserted in the second version. But also things like row inserts. We ran some tests with Microsoft's own comparison tool. If you insert a row in a complex spreadsheet, it could result in tens or hundreds of thousands of changes as all the cells under it shift and all the references to those cells under it shift as well. When in most cases, the changes are fairly innocuous in the sense that it's not actually causing any issues and the end user didn't actually change those references, right? So we try to really zoom in on what an end user is actually doing. And with things like row or column inserts, those shifts are recorded from this compare tool perspective. So I think super, super powerful software. Just to be able to run through the whole suite one more time, we've got the risk analysis portion, which really looks at auditing and locating those risks. The visualization tool is really great for documentation, for being able to talk to colleagues or auditors, being able to share kind of that underlying structure with clients, for example. We've got the highlight, which looks at from a cell by cell level where mistakes and where kind of structure things are going on, and that compare functionality for version management and seeing the difference between different versions of the tool. But what I'd like to offer everyone in this call is for anyone that's interested in kind of having a further chat, not even necessarily about purchasing the software, but more just looking at how, Excel is being used currently by you or by your company or by your team, but also potentially how we could help in that process. And maybe one or more of the elements could be of use to you. Please shoot me an email at the email on the screen now. So it's just my first name at perfectxl.com. And I'll set up a one-on-one with you, or I can give you some additional details or some additional information. And if you're willing to reach out, I can set you up with a trial, let you have a play around with the tools yourself as well, and hopefully find a way to, help in whatever process you might be looking at. So for anyone interested, I'd recommend you do it as soon as possible. That way, you don't forget. I won't forget either. And I kind of want to open it up to Q&A as well. I don't know, Megan, if that's this is a good moment for that. But if anyone has any additional questions, you can throw it in the chat, or maybe at this point also you could unmute your microphone and we can talk about anything.
Well,
Thank you,
I want to
John.
say thank you, Joel, for giving us this opportunity to get to know more about you. Based on the reaction we've gotten, this sounds like something that's going to be right up a lot of our members' alleys. And I think your offer to do individual demos is going to be a great one, because I could almost hear the gears turning in everybody's heads of how they were going to use this. So with that, I am giving everybody the opportunity to send chats, but also if you're more of a one-on-one person, don't forget to email Joel at perfectxl.com. We also, of course, if you happen to lose this and need to contact ICEA, we'll be happy to pass you along as well. And then with that, one moment.
I saw Robert Benson also said, thank you so much for the compliment. Hopefully reach out via the email. I'd love to chat with you and just see, even if it's not necessarily about the software. Again, I'd love to chat about kind of how Excel is being utilized currently in the space. We're also involved in things like training and developing principles in the area. As far as I know, this recording will be available.
Yes,
right,
we'll have
Megan?
it up. We will have it up on the ICEA site and on our YouTube channel around this time tomorrow.
Perfect. Well, it sounds like it will be up on YouTube, which is always easy to reach. And I'd be happy to share the presentation or the files or anything like that with anyone that's interested as well. Again, feel free to reach me at my email. I saw Robert also ask something about ACE IT specifically.
ACIT is is a product that a lot of ICEA members use. So it's another tool that they'd be interested in integrating with.
Okay. I can say with relative confidence that we'd be able to run side by side with something like ACE IT, and that they wouldn't conflict with one another. But I don't know in terms of like integration and how far we could go. It's definitely an interesting idea. And yeah, it's something I can definitely look into.
Okay, I think we'll take you off the spot for the moment. Joel, it looks like the questions are kind of dying down. And if anybody is shy, don't be afraid to email us. And with that, we'll let everybody have a few more minutes to get back to the rest of their schedules. So once again, I want to thank Joel Steendam and PerfectXL for coming today, to Bob Keener for giving his thoughts as well, and to everybody for coming. And then Joel, why don't you give the last goodbye?
Thank you all so much for taking the time. I know it's busy all the time for everybody. But I really appreciate you guys taking the time to hear, yeah, what we do here at PerfectXL. And I'm excited to hear from some of you personally, hopefully. I'd love to have a further chat and see where there might be some overlap between what you do day to day and what we offer.
All right. Thanks again, everyone. Take care.
Yeah.